And you're constantly framing problems that you need to solve and trying to find solutions and then finding their problems with it. And it's really an iterative process, and it's a struggle, which is why a lot of people find
one
it
of the things that John said too, about the creativity of the light bulb going off and that not being the whole process, but and what you're saying too is like I'll outline a book, and that will be the framework of the novel. That's like the architecture of the novel. That, you know, I know what the first act is. I know what my complication is at the top of Act 2. I know what my second act curtain is. Some people say, well, books shouldn't be written in 3 acts. I think any good story has to be told in 3 acts, just like a piece of music has to have its structure. And so I work that structure out, and that's very cerebral. It's very, you know, I know what the book is about. I know what I'm trying to accomplish, and it's very cerebral, the structure. And then I write like a 60 or 70 page narrative, which breaks it into chapters even. And once I've got that done, then I can enjoy the writing process because I won't deviate too much from it. Sometimes I'll find mistakes that I've made in the structure, but basically the books write pretty easily after I've
John, what's your experience?
Well, I was going to follow on what Steve says by saying it sounds like you write books in several different ways. I mean, some of it involves structure and really having a plan, and then some of it is about the play and the joy and the discovery. And I think that says something about the creative process, too, that it's not just one way of thinking, but it's multiple, in a sense, intelligences or ways of thinking that kind of come together. It is kind of a tension, in a way, to have a goal, which we've all said may be part of this process. A picture of the future is Ray's phrase, with all of the uncertainty of trying something, failing, experimenting over here and failing, and having an enormous amount of uncertainty. So to be certain and uncertain, to balance these paradoxes can be very difficult.
Doesn't creativity have to have a better side? Creativity has to be something more than just different to be creative. I mean, it has to be better, or some new way has to have something productive.
Robert, I have a question for Steve along those lines. When you sit down to write a book, given what you just said, you're trying to write something which is good and which is moving and which satisfies your standards of very high excellence. In that way, I could compare you to what Mozart thought he was doing.
You had that comparison before ever?
Mozart and I are frequently compared.
To what degree would it complicate things for you to add to what I've just said, what Beethoven's principal preoccupation was, according to me at any rate, which is to write something which would be a masterwork for the ages? That's to say, where a sort of historical self-consciousness comes in on this.
Well, I would reject that as a concept, because I believe when you put that kind of pressure on yourself to be, you know, to be writing something that is so monumental that that will live thousands of years after you, you know, then I think you by nature you just dry up your creative process.
Well, just wanted to bring up another aspect of creativity. We've been talking about great individual contributors, but when you're creating technology, that's necessarily a group process. And there's a whole other dimension to it, because technology today is so complex, it's necessarily interdisciplinary. And for example, in speech recognition, we have signal processing experts, speech experts, computer experts, linguists, and they need to work together. And they're all speaking different languages, even for the same concept. So we need to establish our own language. We'll actually spend some months just deciding on our own language, which is actually useful, because if anybody overhears our conversations, they have no idea what we're talking about. But then I have a technique where, in order to get people to think outside the box, I'll give a signal processing problem to the linguists, and vice versa, and let them use the disciplines they've grown up in on a completely different problem, and approach it from a way that the original experts in that field would never think of approaching it.
John, have you worked with technology companies as well?
Several times, yeah. And I think what Ray says is very true, that in order to move people out of a literal definition of what is interesting to pursue, it's often really important to almost be like the curator of a set of experiences in a group where you're bringing people with very different points of view together to produce a new perspective on things. So it matters a great deal how you, in a sense, blend together disciplines, points of view that maybe in normal life wouldn't coexist, or where...
Are you saying that the creative process in an organization has some different characteristics to the creative process as an individual, taking Steve Cannell and Mozart as one group.
Those guys.
And, technology companies like Ray's and others that you've worked with.
I think in this case, I would argue that there are some similarities in the sense that everyone at this table is probably a great example of this kind of arbitrage between different kinds of work or different ways of seeing things, you know, within one person and one career. I mean, nobody at this table really has had, one kind of activity they've pursued from beginning to end. Their lives, in a sense, have been about a creative improvisation around themes, adding in new stuff when things got boring, adding to a portfolio. And in a high-tech company, it's often very similar as well. You start off with some very significant initial moves, the founding team or whatever. But in terms of injecting the kind of energy and additional perspective that is required to be successful, you have to be a great chef or a great manager of certain tensions, finding the sweet spot all the time.
Well, I think there's a relationship between Mike's concept of flow and group process. I mean, flow is hard to achieve for an individual because we're so distracted with our daily needs and problems, and so to really connect in that profound way to flow with your creative task is difficult to achieve, but is a key concept in creativity. It's even harder to achieve in a group because people have political issues with the group, and they're not all communicating. So to really achieve that kind of flow in a group where everybody is really connected to the project, where ideas come out from a group where you don't even know, well, whose idea was that? That's really when groups are creative. But groups then can accomplish things that individuals never can because you have a blending of perspectives that are impossible.
Absolutely. Ray and John, you just made, in the last 3 or 4 minutes, a really important point, according to me at any rate. We all start out as fairly narrow disciplinary specialists. Nothing which is worthwhile can be achieved except through the kind of blend of intelligences that is coming from a bunch of different disciplinary specialists working together. And that's not an easy process.
Yeah, but is there a danger in today's world of giving too much individual creativity away? Isn't there something to be said for people sitting out on the loners, 3-4 standard deviations out who are doing things that change the world independently?
Well,
Depends what the field is.
I think that, that we can spark each other.
Yeah.
And in television, one of the interesting things is we work with staffs of writers, and it's very interesting to watch this happen. This was what you guys were both just saying, that you have to give up your sense of self to the group. You have to say, okay, we're all here to try and make a story for Bob to write, and so we're all going to put that together. And I always characterize ideas as little pink things that are running around on the floor, and we can stomp them to death with negativity, or you can say somebody might throw out a kind of a stupid idea. Instead of saying, oh, that's dumb, say, well, you play with it for a little bit, and then something comes from that, and another person will add their sensitivity to it, and then you go, that's kind of cool when it goes like that, and the next thing you know, you've built something amongst all of you that you never would have thought yourself. And then Bob will then take it to write it, because we're creating it for him as a staff of writers for him to write, and then he'll give his own stamp and his own creative flavor to it.
It's yes and versus yes but, in a sense, which is what you get in great jazz. I mean, in great jazz, you've got talented people, they've got to work together. When somebody offers you an idea, you've got to go with it, and sort of add to it, rather than exercising judgment on the front end, because that's how you get to something truly sweet.
Ray, how important is risk in creativity, the willingness to accept failure?
Well, an important part of creativity is failure and one's attitude towards it. I mean, my own view of failure is it's just success deferred. But not everybody feels that way. And if you're afraid of failing, if that's a devastating experience, then you can't be creative. You have to really just see it as part of the iterative process of getting to where you need to go.
God, I really like that. It's success deferred. That's a great
line.
That's a great way to look at it.
And it's inherent in learning. I mean, we never did anything perfect the first time through. We didn't ride a bike the first time we got on it. We had to fail in order to learn. You look at designers. Designers take an idea and they make a model. The model, by definition, is going to be destroyed preferably as quickly as possible, so you can go from version 1.0 to version 2.0.
I think it's important to have target fixation when you're creating, and not think about failure, not think about criticism, not think about rewards, not think about anything but what you're trying to do.
Steve, I want to try to get inside your head since I didn't have a chance with Mozart. Since I didn't have a chance with Mozart. You love being a writer since we've known each other for many, many years, you have a sparkle in your eye whenever we talk about writing. It's never about success. It's never about money. It's always about the writing. Remarkably, you are dyslexic.